Hey, folks. Jim Wallace here, Executive Director of Gun Owners Action League. Recently we put out an alert about what we conceive to be an attack on fish and wildlife lands, wildlife management lands, which we basically pay for. And a lot of average gun owners were posting back or commenting back that, why should we care about this? Well, here's why. And I don't blame anybody for not knowing this, especially the younger gun owners, because they didn't come up through the hunting traditions like a lot of us did. And even some hunters don't know about this. But in fact, it's your money. Every gun owner, it's your money. And here's why. In 1930, let's see, I got the date down, 1937, Congress passed an act called the Pittman-Robertson Act. And what that thing did, because no one else was taking care of wildlife management and wildlife lands. So all these nonprofits out there that say, oh, they're conservationists and they're environmentalists, they were not the ones that started this stuff. You did. So in 1937, they passed a law that said they're going to put an excise tax on all firearms and ammunition and even archery equipment, and that money would be used for wildlife management. And here's the breakdown. So this is paid actually by the manufacturer, but of course they're passing the cost on to us, right, like anything else. So 11% tax on sporting arms, ammunition, and archery equipment, and 10% tax on handguns. Why there's a difference? I have no idea. But half of the tax that's on handguns and archery equipment actually go to fund hunter education throughout the country. It's kind of interesting that they picked handguns to fund hunter education, but you do hunt with a handgun occasionally. So that money is actually also used to fund, believe it or not, state fish and wildlife agencies. And there's a formula they use about how much hunting licenses are sold and whatever, but basically it's called a matching fund. Well, here in Massachusetts, believe it or not, about 60 to 70% of all the funding for Massachusetts fish and wildlife comes from the Pittman-Robinson Act. There's virtually no tax money, general tax money, that goes into fish and wildlife. I think somewhere there's like 1/5 of 1% of a gasoline tax or something, but it's so minimal, it's not even funny. It's your money that pays for all of this. So the lands, the wildlife management is actually paid for by gun owners. And, through the years, people have said, why does Goal even waste time on fish and wildlife issues? Because it's your money. It's your money. Now, hunting is certainly part of the Second Amendment or the benefits of the Second Amendment. It is not the purpose of the Second Amendment, but still, we're trying to protect your money. And over the years, we've done a great job at it. I mean, back in 2003, Mitt Romney tried to do away with the entire dedicated fund, which is necessary, according to federal law, to even receive Pittman-Robinson money in this state. He learned the hard way back then because there was a massive coalition of not only conservation organizations and goal and sportsmen's organizations. And the funny thing is we called it the Guns N' Roses Coalition. And we beat that back pretty hard. And then later on, Governor Deval Patrick tried to raid the fund and also take lands, not just from Fish and Wildlife, but Department of Conservation and Recreation, to put up windmills. And believe it or not, it was the sportsmen who stopped it. Most of the environmentalists were in favor of this thing until Goal and the sporting community actually studied the language and then reported back to the conservation community, and they realized that they were being swindled and what they were being told was a flat-out lie. Now, there are other programs, too, that you may want to know about because historically, again, the Audubon Society and other groups like that, they were not part of the movement for professional wildlife management and land protection. For instance, I got the date again. 1934 was the duck stamp, and it's a federal duck stamp. Basically, if you want to go waterfowl hunting in the country, you had to buy one of these stamps. You know who created that stamp? The sportsmen, the gun owners created that stamp. And you know what that stamp did? It actually created the National Wildlife Refuge System. Again, everybody tries to put that, oh, that was Audubon that did that. No, it was the sportsmen and the gun owners, because back then no one cared about wildlife management and saving wildlands. And a lot of this was under, was Theodore Roosevelt actually started some of this movement. So it's important for us to continue to protect your money. It's your money that's going to these programs in fish and wildlife, in open spaces. And by the way, in 1991, the sportsmen got together because they wanted to save more land, and they self-taxed themselves. It's called the Wildlands Conservation Stamp, and it's a $5 stamp every time you buy a hunting or fishing license or a sporting license or whatever. And that money since 1991 has saved tens of thousands of acres across Massachusetts, to development. And of course now, the Special Reserve Advisory Board wants to take 30% of that. Now, I will tell you for sure, before the current administration that is running Fish and Wildlife, which they're not friends of ours, before that, the State House knew very well that the dedicated Fish and Wildlife Fund and their lands were what we call the third rail of politics. Everybody knew back then that in the State House, if you touched that, the sporting community and the conservation community was going to come at you and come at you hard. Unfortunately, the current administration for Fish and Wildlife is known nationwide as being very weak. And that's why we're starting to see these attacks again, because even the division itself is not standing up. So it's going to be a hard fight on some of this stuff, but we're going to do what we need to do to protect your money. If you need any more information, just reach out to us, and we'll try to get you as much as we can. But again, folks, we're doing what we have to protect gun owners from top to bottom. Jim Wallace, Executive Director, Gun Owners Action League.